Welcome to tonight's webinar. My name is Melanie McKinney, Programs Coordinator for CAN-DO Multiple Sclerosis. Thank you for acting on the belief that you are more than your MS by attending tonight's webinar, Talking to Your Employer, presented by Barbara McKeon and Steve Nissen, both employment experts with the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. CAN-DO MS is an innovative provider of lifestyle empowerment programs for people living with MS and their support partners. We empower people to move beyond their MS by giving them the knowledge, skills, tools, and confidence to adopt healthy lifestyle behaviors, actively co-manage their disease, and live their best lives. Please visit the CAN-DO MS website, mscando.org, where you can register for upcoming webinars and view our archived webinars. Check out our CAN-DO MS lifestyle empowerment programs, including our CAN-DO, Take Charge, Jumpstart, and Jumpstart in Motion programs. You can also share your CAN-DO promise, and you can learn ways you can contribute to or get involved with CAN-DO MS. Now, a few items before we get started. Questions and comments will be addressed at the end of the presentation. We will answer as many questions as time allows. And you can post your question by typing in the chat feature, which is located on the left of your computer screen. To submit a question, type in the small box that says Chat with Presenters. And you can listen to the live webinar through your computer speakers rather than having to call in. And this presentation is being recorded, and it will be archived on CAN-DO MS's website. All of our webinars are archived on our website, and you can view them again at any time. You can also view the webinar schedule and register for upcoming webinars. And those of you who are attending live with us tonight, you'll receive a copy of tonight's PowerPoint presentation in a follow-up email. And please also complete the evaluation at the end of the webinar. We value everyone's feedback. And again, we have two wonderful speakers with us for tonight's webinar. Barbara McKeon is the Director of Employment Programs and Services at the New York City Southern New York chapter of the National MS Society. Prior to her work in rehabilitation, Barbara worked as an executive recruiter and a teacher of the deaf. She has a bachelor's degree in communication arts and a master's in deaf education and a master's in rehabilitation counseling. She is a certified rehabilitation counselor and a licensed mental health counselor. Barbara has presented at numerous workshops and conferences on employment issues for people with MS, as well as other neurological conditions. And Steve Nissen is Senior Director of Employment and Community Programs at the National Capital Chapter of the National MS Society in Washington, D.C. And before coming to the Society, Steve worked as a rehabilitation counselor for the Virginia Department of Rehabilitative Services, and he worked for a private vocational rehabilitation and case management company where he provided job development and placement assistance to individuals with physical disabilities. Steve has a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's in rehabilitation counseling, and he's a certified rehabilitation counselor. He recently co-authored Employment Issues in Multiple Sclerosis, the second edition. So before we get started with tonight's presentation, we have our survey up on the screen to learn more about who's in our audience this evening. If you can click if you're a person with MS, support partner, healthcare professional, or other, that'd be great. And as always, it's overwhelmingly people with MS. And thank you to the support partners that are here with us this evening. And with that, I will turn the slide deck and presentation over to Steve and Barbara.
Thank you, Melanie. So good evening, everyone. We're really so pleased that you've joined us on the call this evening and hope that you find the information that we're going to provide beneficial. If you're listening to this program, we're going to assume that you're currently working and have either decided to tell your employer about your MS or possibly considering telling but have a number of questions still running through your head. However, there may be some of you out there who are not working and are wondering how to deal with disclosure once you start working or perhaps during an interview. So we wanted to start out with a polling question. What your employment status is, if you're not working and receiving disability, if you're not working but are looking for work, working full-time, or working part-time. And just respond with the answer that best suits you so we can get some sense of your current employment status. So wow, there we have some results. Most of you are working full-time and a few working part-time, and we still have some more coming in. But there are a small percentage of you who are not working and looking for work, and some receiving disability, so we're going to do our best to try to address all of your concerns. Okay. So disclosing is really one of the most difficult decisions people with MS face. For those of you who may have already made the decision to disclose, we plan to go through the steps of how to do this. But first, we think it's important to be sure you're aware of your rights and reasons for disclosing, because once you tell, you can't take it back. And perhaps at the end of this call that you'll feel that disclosing now is still the best option for you, or you may choose to wait. But whatever your decision, at least now you'll have information and tools to help you with the process. And I think it's important to start out this discussion by pointing out that you have no legal obligation to tell your employer about your MS unless your medical condition is impacting your ability to do your job and you're needing some assistance, or if you need to take some time off because of your MS symptoms. And we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail later, but I just wanted to start out by making that point. And even if you are having symptoms but are managing them and work is getting done, again, you do not need to disclose. However, despite what I just said, some people still want to disclose. So let's just look at some of the reasons why. Why are you disclosing? Let's go back to why you're disclosing. Be aware of your reasons, okay? There are many, and I guess for a lack of a better word, some are emotional and some are more practical in nature. So first, let's look at the more emotional reasons. Sometimes people feel guilty or somewhat dishonest, like they're carrying around a little secret and that they're afraid of being found out, perhaps concerned that there may be negative consequences for not telling. Some people feel like they just want to tell. Sometimes it's because they have a close relationship with their boss and are concerned that he or she might feel hurt, that they did not share this information. Others would just prefer to let people know before there's a problem. All of these are good reasons if they're important to you, but keep in mind, in none of these situations are you legally required to disclose. So now let's look at a few practical reasons why people often want to disclose. Maybe you need to take some time off because of your MS. Or perhaps you stopped taking your medication because side effects were impacting your work performance. Perhaps you're missing medical appointments because of work, or your work is suffering and you've either gotten a bad evaluation or afraid you will get one. Maybe your symptoms are becoming obvious and people are starting to notice and say things to you, or maybe you're at a point where you need an accommodation in order to continue to do your job. Here we're talking about reasons that may require disclosure on some level and are situations that have the potential to escalate and create larger problems. So now that we've explored the reasons, let's look at the pros of disclosing. And there are quite a few. It can reduce stress because once you've disclosed, you now may feel a sense of relief and find support from people in the workplace that you didn't have before. It gives you the opportunity to educate others, to let others know about MS, to let them understand a little bit about, how some of the symptoms are hidden. And even though, you can't see that I may be very tired or may be significantly fatigued, this is something that people with MS experience. And perhaps have the opportunity to dispel some preconceived notions or myths about the condition. It also makes it easier for you to communicate your needs in the event that your condition changes and you do need an accommodation. Disclosing medical information sooner rather than later may provide an opportunity to speak about your MS in a positive light, as opposed to waiting until problems arise. It allows you to take care of medical needs without worry, so you can go to an appointment and not feel like you're having to hide it. And here's a very important thing to consider. If you do not disclose and get the help that you need, if you're needing help, will you lose your job anyway? And if so, then you have more to gain by disclosing. So let's look at the flip side, the cons. Once you've given people this important information about yourself, you can't take it back. People have their prejudices, and despite your best efforts, they may react negatively toward you. People may feel less comfortable around you or worry that your MS might be contagious. They may incorrectly view you as someone less competent or less able to handle stress, and you could be held back from promotions, but will find it difficult to prove that this was because of your MS. It may be hard to maintain your privacy depending on who you tell. Not everyone is required to keep your information confidential. If you're currently experiencing an exacerbation, before you think of disclosing, perhaps consider if it's possible. Could you ride it out by using vacation and sick time? Based on questions we received earlier before the program started, I added a bullet that's not up on the slide, and that is that there are some professions where disclosing may actually be the kiss of death, and there may be little you can do except to exercise your rights under the law if an employer does blatantly discriminate, demote, or terminate your position. Unfortunately, there are unscrupulous employers who will find a way to get around the law, so you need to understand if yours is one of those professions where this might become an issue. So, for example, if you have cognitive issues and have a cognitively demanding job, that could raise flags to an employer, and this may be a problem. I know individuals in the fashion industry who have informed me that they felt it would be a big issue for them based upon what they know of their profession. And there may be plenty of other professions where either physical issues or cognitive issues could be an issue. These are all some of the things you need to consider and weigh out within your own personal situation. You also need to know your rights and your legal protections. You need to know your rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or what we call the ADA, as well as the Family and Medical Leave Act, in addition to any local human rights laws that will help you maintain your employment. The ADA allows you to request reasonable accommodations and provides job protection in the event you are discriminated against because of your medical condition. The FMLA provides you with 12 weeks of unpaid leave a year while protecting your job and can be used all at once or intermittently, as in small increments of an hour, if you need it for time off, for medical appointments, or treatments related to your MS. And this allows you to be protected. In order to be eligible for FMLA protections, your employer must have 50 or more employees, and you need to have worked at your company for a year at a minimum of 1,250 hours. In order to take advantage of these resources, you will need to disclose some information about your medical condition or impairment. So how much will really depend on what you're requesting. I think it's important for you to know that you should familiar yourself with your company's time and leave policies, as well as short or long-term disability plan requirements. If you anticipate difficulties with your employer, yet do need to disclose, you may also want to consult with an attorney who specializes in employment law. Also, discussing your situation with someone at your local National MS Society chapter is highly recommended. And just so that you know, go to the next slide, the National MS Society has a disclosure tool, and that's a sample of the disclosure tool page, and the website is up on top, or the web link is up on top there. And this tool will walk you through making this decision. It provides you with links to resources and may be helpful for you to take a look at and go through your particular reasons to see if it helps you in making a decision.
Great. Thanks, Barbara. So now, as you're grappling with the decision to disclose, the next step is really to look at the different issues that may arise or questions to ponder. In the work that Barbara and I do, we definitely say that no two situations are the same. No two people's MS are the same, and no two employers are the same. But there are some key things to keep in mind before talking with the employer. The first question that we oftentimes pose with our clients is why? What are your reasons for disclosing? In the work that Barbara and I do, we can never tell a person definitely whether they should or shouldn't disclose. Oftentimes we engage them in a discussion, and we might pose pointed questions like, what's going on at work that makes you think that it's time to bring this up with the employer? Or do you feel like that your symptoms are beginning to possibly impact your performance and you might benefit from some accommodations? Really, Barbara has gone over the potential reasons for disclosing, both the emotional and the practical or the legal. So try to figure out what your reasons are for wanting to or for not wanting to. Another question that to think about is who. This varies greatly to employer. Who needs to know this information? It could be your direct supervisor. It could be someone in your human resources department, your benefits person. Some employers have a disability program manager. Look at how your specific employer is structured and try to determine who might be the best person to talk with about this. The person that you initially speak with might not necessarily be the one who can provide the accommodations or take action on what you're telling them. So we encourage people to be proactive. Once you've determined who you think the appropriate person is or who you feel most comfortable talking to about this, ask if anybody else needs to know or they need to be brought into the loop. Maybe someone in HR would need to be involved if you're talking with your direct supervisor. When it comes to disclosure, what's so important is that you want to try to control as best as possible who knows and what they know. Part of the Americans with a Disabilities Act that Barbara mentioned deals with confidentiality. But that's when dealing with management. If you disclose to a direct supervisor, to someone in HR, that information, if you provide it in writing, should be kept in a separate file. That supervisor does have the responsibility to maintain confidentiality. But if you choose to tell your coworkers or word does get out, know that they could talk about it and tell other people. The next question to ponder is when. When to talk to your employer. When we say timing is everything, that is very true in regard to talking with your employer about multiple sclerosis. As Barbara stated before, once it's out, it's out. So you want to determine when is the right time to actually disclose. So what does the Americans with Disabilities Act say regarding disclosure and the relationship to reasonable accommodations? The ADA says that a person does not need to disclose their disability or their condition unless they need a reasonable accommodation. However, if they need an accommodation to perform the essential functions of their job, then they do need to disclose. So it's kind of a double-edged sword under that law as it pertains to a disclosure. I've worked with people who have put it on their resume or want to disclose at the interview just for the sake of putting it out there. Why put up the red flag at that point? Yes, employers are not supposed to discriminate, but you never know how that information will be used in making a final decision. When you're going through that interview process, remember that you are basically interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. You might be meeting with a recruiter who really is not the correct person to know this information. So these could be reasons to not disclose at the interview. Times when someone might need to disclose for the interview would be to make sure that the location is accessible. For example, if you're using a piece of mobility equipment. But you would not need to give a whole lot of information. You may just be able to use general language to make sure that the office or the meeting space is accessible. we can never specifically tell a person to disclose or not, or when, but we generally discourage disclosing at the interview setting. So what are some other times when a person might consider disclosing? Another possible time might be a person might think about disclosing is when the job offer is made. You have obviously demonstrated yourself as the right candidate for the job. The employer wants you to work for them. During this time after the offer is made, but before you start, the employer does have the right to ask pretty much anything. So there might be a need to disclose, but if the offer is rescinded, it would have to be clear that it was rescinded due to a business-related reason and not just because of the MS. So another timing when a person might consider disclosing is once they start the job. This allows a person time to see if they're having any difficulty performing the essential functions of the job, which are the primary job responsibilities of that position. They would be able to figure out, are they having difficulty performing those functions, and therefore have the right to request a reasonable accommodation. We're going to be talking about some accommodations here later. But by waiting until you start, this may also give you time to determine who the appropriate person would be to talk with about it. It could also give your employer the chance to see the kind of worker that you are. And if you choose to disclose, you can hopefully use some positive working traits that you have already demonstrated. Some clients that we've worked with might choose to never ever disclose. Again, this is a very personal choice. If you can perform your job duties effectively without needing any accommodations, there may be no practical or legal reason for disclosing. But again, think back to what Barbara talked about initially. What are some of the potential emotional reasons for wanting to? The next question to think about is what to actually say. Come up with a disclosure script. We're going to be watching a short video clip in just a minute that talks about a disclosure script. Gives you the 4 different components of it, but here's the crux of why you are on this webinar tonight. What do you actually say to your employer? You'll see that there are 4 components of a disclosure script, and I'll talk more about it after we watch that clip. But be thinking about if you would need to provide an actual medical diagnosis as opposed to using general language. If you do choose to start off at a lower level of disclosure and that employer requires or requests additional information, pretty much you would have to give it. You would have to give a medical diagnosis, but gauge what feels right. Again, this varies from person to person, situation to situation. Before we watch the clip, the last kind of question to ponder is how. We oftentimes get this question, should it be in writing, should it be verbal? Again, each situation is different. Some people might prefer not to put it in writing unless it is absolutely necessary. On the other hand, putting something in writing provides a written record of disclosing and requesting accommodations just in case things do go poorly. This might be the proof that's needed in case your employment situation changes as a result of talking with the employer, or you feel that you're being discriminated against. Also know that if your situation changes, maybe your supervisor or whoever you disclose to leaves, and everything was done verbally, there may be no formal record of that disclosure and those types of accommodations that you had been provided. So you may need to renegotiate with the new supervisor. That new supervisor might not be as flexible. This could cause some grief and some stress on your part. Again, each situation in person is different, so do what feels right. I'll talk a little bit later about a publication available from the Job Accommodation Network, which provides a template to use if you do decide to put things in writing, and I'll talk about that towards the end of tonight's program. So we're going to watch a clip here. We're going to watch a clip from a National MS Society program that's called Career Crossroads. This is a program that follows Claire, who's someone relatively newly diagnosed with MS, who's working as a graphic designer. She's beginning to have some symptoms that are becoming more visible, some balance problems, but is also dealing with some of the hidden or the invisible symptoms like cognitive symptoms and fatigue. Through her course of figuring out what to do with employment, she is getting some insight and some assistance from her friend who's a librarian, and through their discussions we get insight, and we hear from a variety of different professionals like vocational rehabilitation counselors, attorneys, doctors, as well as actually other people with MS who are working. So we're going to show the segment of the video that really describes a disclosure script, breaks down the 4 different components, and gives you some ideas about what you might actually say in talking to your employer. It's around a 5-minute video, so please watch it, and we'll talk a little bit more about it afterwards.
I'm going to start the video. One of you might have your computer speakers on because there's a slight echo when you're speaking, Steve. So I don't know
Okay.
if maybe someone's computer speakers are on, like yours or Barbara's, but let me go.
Disclosure script. Practice it. Usually a disclosure script is comprised of 4 different parts. One is disclosing the MS or the medical condition.
Sometimes people with MS, we've talked with a lot of folks who will say things like, oh, I have this nerve thing, comes and goes. Well, guess what, folks? MS is a nerve thing. It does come and go, and you haven't sold away your privacy when you share it in that fashion.
I tell my clients to keep it simple and not to give more information than is needed. And what they need to know is you have an impairment or you have a disability and it's under control. Now,
your employer can ask for written documentation of the disability, and that documentation does not need to include your diagnosis. That documentation, we recommend, be a 1 or 2 sentence line from a healthcare provider, social worker, psychologist, rehabilitation counselor, nurse, physical therapist, occupational therapist. These are the people who can certify disability status.
So let's hear the first section.
Okay. I have recently been diagnosed with MS. No. Okay, that's just not right. Okay, I've recently been diagnosed with a medical condition that is affecting some of my mental and physical functions.
Okay, I think you need to be more specific about your mental and physical functions. I mean, you don't want them to think that all of a sudden now you have an IQ of 35 and you're about to pass out at this moment.
Yeah. All right. Okay, you're right. Okay, so I have recently been diagnosed with a medical condition that affects my memory and balance.
Yes, I think we're off to a good start.
The second component would be describing the way that DMS is directly affecting her.
Remember last year I did this for you? Well, I had MS, but it wasn't a problem. Now all of a sudden it's a problem. It's not, I don't want it to be a problem. So I want to continue to do, and I think I can, and emphasize the positive.
Obviously with MS there's so much variability from person to person that it's important to relate your MS, to relate Claire's MS, to her symptoms and how they are affecting her at work.
Okay, I am proud of the award-winning work that I've been able to produce for the agency. I want to continue to do what I do best, developing creative and innovative design solutions for our clients. My memory and balance issues are beginning to interfere with my ability to be as effective as I want to be.
You're on a roll, girl.
The third component is providing the accommodations or suggesting the accommodations to the employer.
See, if you know what your company's policy is, say, you know, boss, I was thinking about Flexiplace, or I was thinking about our telecommuting policy, or maybe work at home, and I found this. And the boss might say, gee, I didn't even know we had that. Can we do that? Well, but your job requires you to be here. Well, I can be there if you need me.
I just don't know what kinds of accommodations I need to ask for.
Well, that's something that we'll need to investigate. Let's just put that issue aside for right now and move on.
And the fourth component of that disclosure script is finishing on a positive note. With these accommodations, I know I'm going to be able to continue to excel in my job. I know I'm going to be able to perform and to meet the deadlines that I need to meet.
Rather than saying, under the ADA, I'm entitled to reasonable accommodation. Your boss is going to go, oh my God, there's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Get her out of here. You want to create build on the positive, and you want to build with your successes.
I think there's the course of action of making sure they understand it is in their beneficial, their financial, and productive interests to make you as productive as possible because of the cost of bringing in a new person.
And I'm looking forward to working with you to find the best solutions that will maximize the contribution that I can make to our company.
Okay, I think we're almost there. The only part we need to deal with now is this part about accommodations, which we'll work on next time. Hey, Claire. What's going on?
Oh, this is so hard, Vanessa. I mean, I feel like I'm coming out or something. I just have no idea how people are going to react to me, and how will I respond to them?
I can't really answer that. All I know is that right now, while you're feeling very alone, know that there are a lot of other people who have gone down this road before you. And it'll be good for you to learn from their experiences.
So, as you hopefully saw from that clip, there are 4 basic parts to a disclosure script. The first part is disclosing the condition, and as mentioned in the video, is there a need to provide an actual medical diagnosis, or can you use general language? This is even part of the disclosure process. Do I want to give a medical diagnosis or not? Like I mentioned before, sometimes we do encourage people to start off at whatever lowest level of disclosure that they feel comfortable with. If you choose initially not to give a diagnosis, but if that employer does require or they request additional information, oftentimes the employee does not have a choice but to provide the information that the employer is looking for. The second part of that script is to relate it to your specific symptoms. It's important not to give a laundry list of all of your symptoms, but make it work related. What sorts of symptoms could possibly be impacting you on the job? The third part of the script is to state the accommodations that you are going to be requesting. We're going to talk a little bit more accommodations in just a minute here, but accommodations are basically the modifications or changes that you are requesting to aid you in getting your job done. Again, the ADA says that you need to be able to perform the essential functions of your job with or without accommodations. So those accommodations are the changes, the modifications that you're looking for. The fourth part of that script is finishing on a positive note, making sure that it's that you're trying to get across to your employer that you'll be a more effective employee, you'll be more efficient, you'll do a better job. I know in the video you watched kind of Claire crafting her script. Just a quick kind of example. I was working with one of our members who was employed as a receptionist, and one of her essential functions of her job was to take messages as the phones were ringing, and she needed to write down messages. Well, she was experiencing some fine motor difficulty, so she was having difficulty writing. So she had determined that it was difficult for her to write, but on the computer she was very effective. She could, type much, much faster, and it was legible. So her disclosure script that she came up with was something to the effect of, once she determined who the appropriate person was, she said to her boss that, I want you to know that I'm diagnosed with MS. In my situation, I have difficulty writing legibly. It's difficult for me, but if I can take messages on the computer, I will not miss any phone calls, and in fact, I can just forward those messages to the employees, send it via email, so they'll get it even more in an even more timely fashion, and I'll definitely be able to keep up with the phone as it's ringing. Again, it's a pretty basic kind of example, but it worked. So just be thinking about how you could incorporate these 4 components into what your specific situation is. So I wanted to say a few words about accommodations because, like we said, under the ADA, disclosure and accommodations do really go hand in hand. A definition of a reasonable accommodation are modifications or adjustments to a job, the work environment, or the way that things usually are done that enables a person with a disability to enjoy an equal employment opportunity. Please know that accommodations are possible for both visible and the invisible symptoms. I listened in myself on a training a couple months ago done by the Labor Department, and their speaker really talked about accommodations, describing them as productivity enhancers. So keep this in mind. These are things that you might want to request that will help you be more effective and productive on the job. Know that when it comes to accommodations, there's a lot of low-cost or actually no-cost accommodations that can prove very effective. Flexible work schedule. We have seen this again and again in terms of managing some of the most common symptoms that we see with MS. Telecommuting, working an altered schedule. If you have more energy to work in the morning, can you adjust your work schedule so you can get into work early and you can leave, or vice versa, so you don't have to deal with rush hour traffic? Can you get to work later? These may not cost an employer anything, but can have a huge impact. Also, just looking at the physical location of where your workspace is, making sure that it's placed by the frequently visited areas that you might need to go to. I think with MS, and actually with disabilities in general, we see the importance of the use of computer technology and assistive technology. These things can be very effective. For example, if someone may have difficulty typing or they find typing overly tiring, there's programs like Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is a voice-to-text software, which converts what you say into a microphone into a text on your computer. Some other accommodations, we know that cognitive dysfunction can be a big challenge to deal with on the workplace. So looking at can you telecommute? Can you get a quieter space within the office? Can you use a white noise machine that might drown out the background noise and maybe help you focus? Know that when it comes to accommodations, this process requires you to be proactive. Sometimes once it's become a performance issue, it may be too late. So be thinking proactively about what types of accommodations might help you work better. You have the bulk of the responsibility. You determine what accommodations you might need, and it's up to you to request them. Your employer does not have to see that you're struggling. This is supposed to be, though, a collaborative and an interactive process, so you need to come up with ideas of what will work for you, present this to your boss or human resources, who should then say either yes or no. If they say no, they might have some other idea, say that we can do this, but also maybe it's important for you to have a backup option in mind, just in case your initial requests are not going to be possible. Know that with accommodations, it may change over time as your symptoms change or when someone's experiencing an exacerbation. I'm going to talk about JAN, which is the Job Accommodation Network, here in just a few minutes, but this is an amazing resource when it comes to brainstorming some practical accommodation strategies.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So we're getting to the end of our presentation, but we kind of have some resources we want to go over before we start taking questions. And I just sort of kind of want to wrap up on some disclosure tips. And disclosure tips, you want to keep it simple. You know, as we've said before, this is a very personal decision. No one else can make it for you. It's often most commonly done when someone needs an accommodation. You need to carefully weigh out the pros and cons of your personal situation. And you want to start out by keeping it simple. Stay away from medical terminology. And know you don't need to give your full medical history. You only need to give what information is necessary to obtain the accommodation or leave that you're requesting. The other thing you want to think about is being proactive in a couple of ways. Being proactive as to who else might need to know. You may think it's only your HR department or your supervisor, but there may be others who need to know, and your HR department can help with this. Also, if you're having difficulty and it's becoming noticeable, don't wait until you get a bad evaluation or are put on a performance plan. By then, it may be too late to get protections. The other thing is to practice, practice, and be open to questions. You don't want to go in, speak to your employer, just drop this information and then quickly leave. It's understandable that they're going to have questions for you, so you need to be prepared for what may be asked and how you're going to handle your response. Just like the woman in the clip we showed, it helps to practice with someone so you're prepared and they can throw questions at you, and this gives you an opportunity to kind of think through what might be asked by your employer. The other thing is to stay away from medical terminology and don't give a complete medical history. And I think I did mention that a little bit before. The other piece is that it can be ongoing or revisited. It's important to realize that disclosure with MS is something that you might need to revisit over the course of your career, not just when there's a change in your symptoms, but also if there's a change at the workplace. Like perhaps you have a new supervisor, or you're switching departments and teams, putting in for promotion. You're going to need to now disclose to new people. Part of the disclosure deals with confidentiality, so you can't assume that whoever you told initially shared this with others, and actually, most times, you really wouldn't want them to, and we did talk about that a little bit earlier. The other time you may have to disclose again is when your symptoms change and accommodations are no longer working and you either need to ask for new ones or want new ones.
So we wanted to definitely talk about some of the resources available to help you navigate this potentially difficult decision. Again, like we said, no two people, no two situations are the same, but there are many resources available. So we just wanted to talk a little bit about what we offer through the National MS Society. Both Barbara and I work for the National MS Society. We do have a variety of different publications and brochures that you see on the screen now. I believe you all will be sent handouts, which actually will include two of these brochures, the Win-Win Approach to Reasonable Accommodations and the Information for Employers. All of these publications are available free of charge by calling our toll-free number 1-800-344-4867 or visiting our national office's website, which is nationalmssociety.org. Barbara mentioned the website for the disclosure tool. On this next slide, we talk about the Job Accommodation Network, or JAN. JAN is really an amazing resource that provides free confidential services. It's sponsored by the U.S. Labor Department, been around since the 1980s, and they're really kind of one of the preeminent resources when it comes to accommodations, legal protections, as well as some of the disclosure issues that we had talked about tonight. Again, you will see on the slide 1-800-526-7234 and their website askjan.org. I put in these two screenshots. These are two publications, and in the work that Barbara and I do that we use on a fairly regular basis. The first one, the Ideas for Writing an Accommodation Letter, that was the publication that I mentioned earlier. This gives you basically a template that you can use. You can personalize it if you do choose to formally request an accommodation from your employer. The next link on Jan gives information specific to multiple sclerosis. The ADA National Network at www.adata.org is another great free resource regarding legal protections and can answer some of those disclosure questions as well. We did include the next two resources, the United States Equal Employment Opportunities Commission and the State Fair Employment Practice Agencies. We put these in here because we know that sometimes talking with your employer does not go as you would have liked or as you would have planned. Even if you practice, even if you come up with the best script, you never know how that employer is going to respond. So we wanted to include these resources because if that happens, there are several agencies that you can contact if you feel that you're being discriminated against in the workplace. You can file a complaint with these agencies, and they will then conduct an investigation. Also, if you feel that maybe your employer is just not willing to provide an accommodation, they're not being responsive to your requests, whether verbal or in writing, again, you would have some legal protections to determine if what's going on is in fact discrimination. So that concludes kind of our formal part of the presentation, and we wanted to leave some time for questions and answers.
Sure. Thank you so much, Steven and Barbara. Bear with me while I pull up some questions here. This is an interesting question. This is an individual who does work for a temp agency. Are they under any obligation to disclose to the temp agency or to the company that's temporarily hiring them?
Well, I'll take a stab at this.
I was going to say, Barbara, do you want to take this one, or do you want me to take it?
The two of us, we'll try to give an answer. You know, the person who's actually paying your paycheck is really your employer. However, if you're going to be needing an accommodation, the person who's managing your work duties is also considered your employer, and so it's tricky. I'm not 100% certain, but this is certainly something we can find out for you. But I think that you would have to, if you needed an accommodation, initially at least disclose to your the person who pays your paycheck, who is your employer, and then the place where you're doing your work, your temp position. You know, your employer would have to, the temp agency would have to work with you on how to handle getting that accommodation from them, because they're now the client for your employer. Steve, you have anything else to add?
No, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, ultimately, your employer is the temp agency, so I would most likely start there. Again, I think just thinking about that proactive, who else needs to know, start off with the temp agency and then determine, okay, does wherever I'm reporting to work, do they need to know? And if so, is this something that temp agency discloses or talks about, or is that something that's your responsibility? But yeah, I would start with, like what you're saying, whoever's paying your paycheck is ultimately the employer.
Great, thank you. Another question is, with asking for accommodations, is it best for the individual to come to the employer with some suggestions for accommodations, or should it start as a discussion with the employer?
I think it's always best to come with a solution. You know, you're going into your employer, and as Steve talked about going in on a positive note, you want to go in there and you want to present a positive case. I've been working here for X amount of time. I've been doing a good job, et cetera, et cetera. This is what my situation is, but here are some ideas that I have. So you're not walking into your employer with a problem and no possible solution. That doesn't mean they're going to give you what you want. It might not be something that they can do, but it's supposed to be interactive, meaning then a discussion can ensue, meaning, well, we can't do this, but maybe we can do that, and there's a little back and forth there, or maybe they can give you what you're asking for, but it's always wise to go in and go in with some ideas.
Yes, I would concur with everything that you say, Barbara. That's definitely something that I do suggest with the clients that I'm working with is you want to come to your employer with solutions, not just throw this problem out there. Again, it's really the bulk of the responsibility under the ADA does fall on you, the employee, so it's important to show that you've done your homework, do your research, call the MS Society, call Jan, know what types of accommodations that you want to request before you even start that conversation.
Great, thank you. Another question is, what are your options if your employer is not working out something with you? What would you suggest for someone in that situation at that point?
I always suggest that people have a couple different tiers of what they're asking for. So if my employer's, I guess I'm trying to think positively, maybe they're not going to provide this first request, but would they be willing to provide my backup request or my backup to the backup? If you really feel like that employer is not willing to engage you in a conversation, part of the accommodation does look at reassignment to another position. But if you really feel like that your employer is just not going to go anywhere with this, and you feel like that's discriminatory, then again the person would have the right to file a complaint with the United States Equal Employment Opportunities Commission or their state fair employment agency. Just brief, and we could talk another hour about the ADA, but the ADA does primarily apply to private employers with 15 or more employees. So some employers may not be legally responsible for following the ADA, but that's also where sometimes some of those state fair employment laws come into play that may provide similar protections as the ADA to employers who do have fewer than the 15. Again, if you really feel like that things are just going south and you would want to file a complaint, you would have the right to do that, and those would be the agencies for you to contact. Know that once you go down that route, it could change the work environment, but if it's already kind of going south, you may not really have anything to lose. Barbara, what would you say?
I think you covered it, Steve.
Okay.
I don't think I need to add to that.
I hope I'm explaining this question well. This is maybe someone who's wanting to move. This is a company with different locations. The first part of the question is, are they still covered by ADA? And what about approaching the new boss in that situation with accommodations? I guess the main part of that is they're just wondering about if they're covered.
I guess I'm not clear on that. Are they covered if they change?
If they're changing within the company, I guess from one factory or one location to another.
And they already had an accommodation?
It looks like it. That their original boss, they had asked for accommodations, and now they are transferring to another location. Maybe a different state or whatever.
This is sort of what we talked about a little earlier about how it's good to have it in writing when you first ask, because then it's on record that this is something you've asked for, it's been approved. If you had a verbal agreement with with your supervisor and now you're going someplace else, it may be much more difficult because now you're going to have to totally revisit it, and you don't have any proof that you got it at the other department or whatever. Again, I'm not clear on what this is, whether it's another department or whether it's another division or whatever, but it'd be likely that it's going to have to be revisited, and you have the same rights. The rights don't change. The thing is, if you had been given an accommodation, and I've seen this happen before, where someone had worked out a situation with their employer where they were given certain days. I had a nurse that was given special days and hours, and she had it for 4 years, and that nurse, the supervisor left, and a new supervisor came in and said, you can't do this. We can't have this happen. So it became a really big issue, and she really had to fight for it. And so, I don't know what your situation was, but if you are going to a new boss, a new division, the likelihood is that you're going to have to revisit. If you've spoken to your HR department already, if this information is with your HR department, you can work with them perhaps then in the disclosure to a new division or a new department. Can you think of anything else on that, Steve?
No, I mean, I guess what I was thinking of, too, was, one big employer who follows the ADA because they meet the criteria, and even if they have multiple locations, that employer still follows the ADA. So if it's, I'm moving from Montana to Virginia, still with this employer, and they abide by the ADA, they would still be abiding by the ADA in the state in which you're moving to, if that was part of that question too. Just
sure.
trying kind of to interpret it a little bit.
No, thank you. I think I think that pretty much covered that question. I know we touched on this briefly before we started the webinar this evening. Would you all mind going into the difference in the situation where the individual goes to the employer with confidentiality versus disclosing it to coworkers? I've had a few people ask about that situation.
Sure, I can start, Barbara, and then if you want to contribute too. I mean, part of the ADA does deal with confidentiality. So if a person is disclosing to their supervisor or someone in HR, it is supposed to be kept confidential. I think that's where, in the work that I do with clients, trying to be proactive, okay, does anybody else need to know? Do we need to, if I'm disclosing to my supervisor, does someone in HR need to know? That way then you are controlling who knows. It is supposed to be protected. That is part of the ADA in terms of confidentiality. It should not become water cooler conversation. In contrast, there's no similar protections regarding confidentiality when it comes to your coworkers. They're under no legal obligation to keep that information private. They can tell anybody who they want. Obviously, we would encourage you to, if you are telling people, whether coworkers or supervisors, if you want them to keep it confidential, to request that, say, I'm coming to you in confidence, I would really appreciate it. But coworkers are honestly under no legal obligation to keep it private.
Great. I think that covered it. Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for one last question, and this may be something that the employer has to determine. This person's wondering, determining a percentage of a job duty that's considered an essential function. I don't know if that...
Essential functions should be in a job description. When someone was first hired, they should have... get access to their job description, and it should state in their job description what their essential functions are. Sometimes people start a job and, they're told that this is what their essential functions are going to be, and then as they're there over time, they may be asked to pick up this and pick up that. But the crux of their job, the vast percentage of what they do, are their essential functions, and there should be something in writing. Not always, but there should be. Steve, you?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say the same thing. It's not like that. I mean, really, who determines that percentage would most likely be the employer, right, Barbara? I mean, the employer saying, okay, here is what an employee who is hired for this position is expected to do.
Right.
So I don't know how much say an employee would necessarily have when it comes to percentages in terms of what really constitutes an essential function of the job.
Sure. Great. Thank you so much. It seems like there's never enough time for all of the questions, but thank you all, Steve and Barbara, for answering questions this evening as well. Before I go into the conclusion, I just wanted to let the audience know we also have a useful links page if you go to our website, which is mscando.org. And if you go to Can Do Life, which you see there on that top bar, there is a list that pops up when you click on that, and it'll say useful links. It'll get you to this page. And we do also have a link to the National MS Society, which isn't listed here, but it is on the page. I promise you that. And we also have some federal job information as well. But I wanted to make sure that you all knew that you could also get to the National MS Society page through our website, too. We want to make sure that you have access to them. So again, thank you so much, Barbara and Steve, for tonight's presentation. And our next monthly webinar will be on December 11th, and it's at the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and the topic is Managing Depression. And our special presenters that evening will be Dr. Roz Kalb, who is a psychologist, and Dr. Alex Ng, who is an exercise physiologist. And this month, we are also offering a special Live Fully, Live Well webinar in conjunction with the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. And Live Fully, Live Well is a wellness program for people with MS and their support partners. So please join us next Tuesday, November the 20th, for a webinar on mobility with physical therapist Mandy Rohrig. And I'd like to share a special incentive for those of you who join us live for the webinars. I do see a lot of the same names come up on the registration list, and thanks to everyone who joins us. To celebrate the upcoming holiday season, we're offering a prize for one lucky winner who joins us live for 3 of our 5 webinars between now and December. And this includes any of our fall webinars, and the prize is a copy of our new book, The Can Do Multiple Sclerosis Guide to Lifestyle Empowerment. And this book was co-authored by several Can Do MS programs consultants, and it was edited by Pat Kennedy, who's a registered nurse and nurse practitioner, and Pat has been a long-time programs consultant on our MS Can Do staff. So please join Can Do MS for our monthly webinar series or for our special Live Fully, Live Well webinar, and we'll pick one individual at random, and the book winner will be announced and contacted on Monday, December 17th. So good luck, everyone. And if you'd like to see reviews or purchase a copy of the book online, please visit mscando.org, and more info is listed under the Programs tab. So join us live from the convenience of your home or office at no charge to you. You can register for the Can Do MS webinars at www.mscando.org under Programs. And for everyone who participated live tonight, once the presentation is over, you'll see a survey appear on your computer screen. And please take a moment to complete the survey and help us continue to improve our webinars. We value your feedback and input. And you'll also receive a copy of tonight's webinar slides by email, and there will also be a special follow-up email with additional handouts that were provided by Steve and Barbara. So again, thank you, everyone, and have a great night.